David Bohm Seminar Series 2, Friday evening, December 1st, 1989, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California.
Let's see, this is the fourth year, and this is probably the largest group we've had. Am I audible now? Yes. Not yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Oh, no.
Well, shall we do something? Okay. Now, sometimes I like to begin by asking people to ask questions or ask whatever's on their mind, so we get some sense of what is on people's minds before we start. It doesn't mean I'll answer all the questions. Well, I'll keep them in mind, you see, but the purpose is not necessarily to get an answer, but just for communication, mainly, and also I may answer some of them. So perhaps we'll start. I mean, 10 or 15 minutes like this is what I suggest, not to go too long, right? Yes.
Is there a difference between the brain and the mind? The brain, is subject to all the chemical reactions and everything in our body. Is there something?
Could you speak up, please?
Oh, is there a difference between the brain and the mind? The brain, is subject to all our chemical reactions and everything. Is there something other than that?
Yes. Is there a difference between the brain and the mind? A very difficult question. Some people believe the brain is all there is, and others say there's something beyond a mind which might not even be individual. And perhaps we will get to that, you see, but it's interesting that there are people here who want to think and know about it.
Fitting into that perhaps might be a rather vague question that I have about indicative thought and how that arises.
Indicative thought, now what is that? I mean, what do you...
Well, many years ago, I remember a talk that you gave about reflective thought and indicative thought. And indicative thought generally points out what not to do more than what to do. It indicates.
Yes, there is thought which reflects on things and thought which might point out, thought which might do other things. I will discuss some of the general nature of thought during this seminar, also what I call participatory thought and some other things which we'll get to, right?
Do you have a purpose for this seminar? Do you have a goal?
Well, and I wouldn't say I have a definite goal. No, I think we would like to discuss some notions about thought, really. And in general, as the years have gone on, we've got more material than can be discussed in one seminar anyway. There has to be some selection. And I would like to communicate so we could not merely discuss, but have what I call at least the spirit of a dialogue. A dialogue being something where people participate and share, right? And where they will listen without trying to come to a conclusion. We will listen to each other and to everything. And perhaps by seeing the meaning of it all, truth will emerge unannounced, you see, rather than saying we're going to try to arrive at truth as our goal, right? So there's a kind of vague purpose in my mind, but it's not all that well defined, right?
What is the difference between thinking and thought?
Yes, the difference between thinking and thought. We will discuss that.
What are the obstacles to dialogue?
Yes, well, we'll discuss that too maybe later on, but the obstacles to dialogue are really people holding to fixed opinions and defending them, you see, and also the belief, each person believing that he's got truth and so on. And those are some of the obstacles. But we'll go into that.
Would you say the
consciousness is a thing?
Is consciousness a thing? Huh? Well, I'd say no. No, but that would be an interesting question. You see, what does the word thing mean?
Versus a process.
Yes, or even is consciousness a process? That's not certain either, right? See, what is consciousness? That's your question, really. What is to be meant by consciousness?
People approach it as if it's a thing, and if it's not a thing, then that approach would be incorrect.
Yeah. See, is there such a thing as consciousness? Some people want to say there isn't, right? For different reasons.
Look at what is going on in the world, especially the quick transformations between the two superpowers and our relationship to that.
Yes, what's going on in the world? Well, we'll discuss that too. I mean, I'm not sure how much attention we can say about this transformation and the superpowers right now, but we will, several questions we want to go into.
Go into creativity.
Creativity, yes. Well, we'll try perhaps to look at that too, yes. Now we're getting at least some idea of the interests of people here, you see. So I think this is part of dialogue for people to realize what's on each other's minds, right? Without coming to any conclusions or, judgments or anything.
Questions that have been asked are really indicative of what people actually are thinking.
I don't know. I mean, it does indicate what's on their mind, at least it's enough on their mind to ask a question. Right?
I just meant in terms of, in such a large group, to really say what's on a person's mind, if it involves some uncertainty, some question that they're not sure of, they may be less inclined to open it.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I mean, many people may not be so sure what's on their mind and they don't want to talk about it, right? Well, at least those who are more sure then will tell me.
Could we perhaps discuss what the factor or environment or conditions are under which change takes place?
Yes, what are the factors under which determining whether change, transformation takes place? Right? Yes, we'll have to discuss, we may get to that. I mean, I would change the question to what are the factors preventing transformation? Right? Yes, and when they are not present, then I say there will be transformation.
Before the weekend is over, I'd like to say something about, I'm interested in Gregory Bateson's work in communication, and he took Russell's work in the theory of logical types, and he decided that there was, Russell decided that there was an order of orders, and that paradoxes were a confusion of logical type, and Bateson took that and worked with it. And his last work before he died was an oscillation theory of communication and relationships. And I was struck by the fact that you have a very fascinating kind of arcane oscillation theory. And I wondered whether there was a relationship.
Well, yes, you want to? No, I don't know if there is one. You see, I've only studied Bateson in a very limited way, so I couldn't say. But maybe the question, if you notice one, we could bring it up. I mean, what do you mean by arcane? Do you mean hidden or difficult? Right? Anybody else?
I'm thinking
question I had as a young child that was never answered, and I still wonder about it some decades later. Is there a difference in the way individuals experience thought, their own internal process? Do some people think in words, and some people think in pictures, and some people have imagination and others have none? Does it differ from individual to individual? Does that have something to do with why people behave so differently?
Is there a difference in the way people think? Well, yes, well, we could perhaps come to that. Perhaps fundamentally not, but there may be a difference in what people emphasize in their thinking. Some are more on one side, some are more on the other. I don't think there's an absolute difference, but some people would think more in pictures and some more in some other way. But perhaps, no, that may come up later, theoretically.
Is truth a process or is truth a fact?
Yes, well, we'll have to discuss the nature of truth. You see, I don't think we can really say that right now. It will come up, right? Is there any more? We could have one or two more, and then...
Could we discuss the process of thought going into feeling and then back into thought and in a sense, getting rid of the bad thought of anger, fear, or the emotion that one's aware of?
Yes, we will discuss the relationship of thought and feeling and all that, yes.
But this brings a question for me, and is there a difference between emotion and feeling?
Is there a difference between emotion and feeling? Yes, well, that depends on how you use the language, right? But we'll discuss thought, emotion, feeling, physical sensations, various things that are related, right? Well, it's sort of already getting an outline of what we're going to do, right?
Isn't any discussion at all essentially meaningless, because words themselves are a paradox. Words are essentially a symbol for what? And if you go into a word, you'll find a paradox. That's fundamental. So the words we use, in that sense, don't get anywhere.
Well, the words you say are a paradox, right? That communication breaks down.
Pardon?
And communication breaks down.
Breaks down, yes.
Yes, well, I suggest that there is a lot of paradox in language, but that communication may still be possible. You see, that if we say there's no communication at all, that you can't maintain that, right? Because you then couldn't even say that, right? You see, in some sense, I will discuss this all later, but in some sense you're trusting to words to tell me that words are paradoxical and that I know what you mean, right?
On a certain level,
yeah.
On the level in which we're operating.
Yeah, but paradox is a very subtle concept. And you see, you're trusting words to communicate that, right?
Pardon?
You're trusting words to communicate the notion of paradox, which is a very subtle thing. You see, in other words, I don't think we can just simply say that words don't do anything, because when you say that, you're already trusting to words to say it, right? You see, we have to say there's a lot of trouble with words, but it doesn't mean that they're absolutely, totally impossible, you see. In other words, we're somewhere in between. And so we admit that words are causing a lot of trouble in communication, but anybody who says that must assume that words can communicate something. You see, it's the same as the question of cynicism, that somebody cannot be cynical about everything, because he would then have to be cynical about his cynicism too, you see. But he takes that seriously, you see. So you can't do it, you see. Right, well, I think there's room for just one more question.
I was wondering if you have thought about any difference or uniqueness in masculine and feminine thinking processes.
Yes, is there a difference of masculine and feminine thinking processes? Well, there surely is some difference, but the question is how fundamental is it, you see. I don't know, it may, if you like, you could bring it up sometime, you see. Now, right. Unless somebody has another question he really wants.
Well, I'm interested in the movement, the negation. And does it have its own movement?
Does negation have its own movement? Now, what does that mean?
Well, it seems, negation seems so dead, or, you know, is there I mean, does it have a movement? Is there I mean, are you alive when you're in negation?
Oh, yeah. Well, isn't it? Well, but surely negation is a part of the whole process, because if things are wrong, if you think they're wrong, then you negate them. You say that they're confused or wrong, or it's part of the whole process of thought is negation, right?
Negation and positivism.
Yeah, they're both two sides of it.
I guess I mean like electricity.
Yeah, well, but negation is one side of thought, and assertion, positing is the other, right? To posit and to negate, right? To posit means to put forth, and to negate means to oppose, right? And both are necessary as part of the movement of thought, right? Right. All right. Well, I think then that's about. It doesn't. We've got most of the questions that people feel, and the. Now you may have gathered already that we're going to be discussing thought. You see, so many of you have been here before, anyway. Know that. I'm suggesting that thought is behind the major ills and difficulties of the human species. Now, this may seem strange if you've never heard it before, because thought is considered to be, by many, the highest achievement of the human species. And I'm not trying to say it has no value. It is a very important achievement, but at the same time, it is a tremendously dangerous thing, as it's a double-edged sword, right? Now, see, you may realize that in many ways the world is in a critical situation in the last few years, or even for quite a bit longer. The nuclear problem seems to have receded to some extent, but somebody remarked there are great changes going on in Eastern Europe, with certain dangers. But there, over the past several thousand years, there have been tremendous amount of chaos. You see, of wars and slavery and oppression and economic disorder and all sorts of things. And it seems to have led to something new now, that we are now in danger of destroying the whole planet. We have been for quite a while, just by our ordinary everyday activities of life, right? These are more dangerous than the nuclear bombs and all the other stuff, because they are using up everything, destroying forests and agricultural land and jungle and changing the climate. And I don't want to detail it all. You must have read it. Very severe changes could take place. Everybody agrees on that. The only question is when, right? Some experts say 50 years. Some say it'll be longer. Some think it's 100 or 200. But if we don't change this, it's fairly certain that a real disaster will occur of magnitude we can hardly imagine. No? There isn't a lot of time. Now, and you can say, well, you have all these ecological problems. What shall we do? Shall we save the whales? Shall we save the jungle? Shall we fight to do this, this, and this? All that's all right, but it's only slowing it down, right? The question is, the ecology is no problem, really. It got along for many millions of years, and until we came along. See, we are the problem, right? Why are we the problem? See, what's the source of it? I say the source of it is in the way we think, right? It is our thinking that has led us to believe that we could just exploit the earth indefinitely. As we believe we can have wars indefinitely and we can do all sorts of things indefinitely that we're used to doing, right? And now, this is all a certain way of thinking. Now, the first characteristic of this way of thinking is just fragmentation, you see, which means breaking things up or smashing things up. It doesn't mean dividing things. You see, you can divide between the sheep and the goats or anything like that, you know, useful plants and dangerous plants, and this is quite all right. But if we divide between things that are united, then we say we try to smash them, right, so they agree with our division, right? See, between nations, I say we have actually a tight connection. It's not a loose connection. Everybody depends on everybody else economically. The ecology is all one. Yet every nation says it's sovereign, which means it can do exactly what it likes. Nobody can tell it what to do, right? That's been a principle for a long, long time. And people find it hard to change. You see, the Brazilians are cutting down their jungle, some of them, but they object to our talking about it because they say you northerners who are prosperous are producing a lot more carbon dioxide than us. Why do you tell us what to do with our jungles, which anyway is ours? And we would probably answer back, who are you to tell us what to do with our industries, you see? See, but as long as we're pretending we're all separate, right? And we can all do what we like, but you see, it can't be done. Huh? Now, but that pretense that we're separate is a way of thinking. You see, nations were invented by thought, right? There was a time every nation was invented by somebody thinking, we've got a nation. We've got a lot of nations now that didn't exist 100 years ago, when just people declared we exist and that's it, right? Then you say everything must be sacrificed for that nation. And we must destroy the world for that nation, and so on, you see. So we also have fragmentation all around, and between religions, say between families, between ideologies, between different professions. You see that everything is broken up. Everything which is really united is in our thought all broken up. So we have a fictitious way of thinking. And if we think in a fictitious way, we are going to get in trouble. So the question is, why do we have this? See, this fictitious way of thinking breaks things up wrongly and it unites them wrongly. It says nations are united. You see, they're all one, but they're not. Inside each nation is tremendous division. You can see it obviously. So they pretend there's unity where there is none, and they pretend there's division where there is none, you see. And everybody sees it that way. So the question is, why are we doing it? Because of our thinking, right? We're used to thinking that way. We've been thinking that way for ages, and it seems people now defend that way of thinking. See, if you tried to really question it, people would get annoyed, right? They would finally say you're making trouble if you kept it up, right? And so on and so on. The fact is that they're making trouble, right? We're getting ready to destroy the whole planet, not merely the human race, but everything else, in order to go on with their habits of thought and all the other things that I've got used to, right? Now, as long as we have this division, it's going to be extremely hard to make the extraordinary change that is going to be needed to meet this ecological problem. We have got to change everything unimaginably radically. I don't want to go into all that, but for just one example, we have to stop growth, economic growth, right? Now, we have to stop population growth. So, how are we going to do it, you see? Now, there's thought that's causing the trouble, right? It's the collective thought of the human race. It's not just an individual. It's passed on, you see. Now, the point is, we get in trouble when you say thought is doing all this. People won't believe it because they say thought is nothing. You see, it's just reflecting on reality, telling you the way things are, and then you decide what to do, right? That's the common view, right? But of course, if you present reality in a certain way, this is going to influence what you're going to do, right? You see, the FBI used to say, we merely present information, It's up to the whoever it is to use it, right? But merely putting information in a certain form has a powerful effect, right? So if we put it in the form that nations are all different and independent, we are going to behave accordingly. You see, information is not just sitting there, it's very powerful. And thought in general is very powerful. It has produced everything. You see, it's produced this building, it's produced cities, it's produced farmland, it's produced industry, it's produced governments, it's produced religions, it's produced schools, it's produced technology and science. It's produced almost everything you see. It's almost impossible now to find a part of the world that was not influenced by thought. And there's hardly a part so wild, right? But thought doesn't want to acknowledge this. The whole process of thought, whatever it is set up to say, I'm not doing it. You see, I didn't do it, right? Right? It's just there. And there it is, a problem, the ecological problem, right? And I've got to think about it some more. Right? So I'll think about it saying, well, we've got to stop cutting down those trees. We've got to stop killing the whales and whatever. So we've got to stop producing all that carbon dioxide. We've got to do all sorts of things. And the thought also says we have got to have more fuel. We've got to have a higher standard of living. But, we've got to produce more industry. And says we cannot possibly get rid of growth, right? So it's impossible. You see, so the question is, it's got to stop sometime. You see, if it grows 2.5% per year, it will grow 10 times in 100 years, 10,000 million times in 1,000 years. So it'll really crush everything. Sometime it's got to stop. You see, so nobody has ever thought about that, right? A few, right? You see, now. So thought says we've got to grow, and thought says we've got to get rid of the consequences of growth, you see. We've got, it's incoherent, you see. It says we've got to grow without these consequences. Now, some improvements of technology could help that, but in the end, you see, you can't win. You see, if it's going to grow in 1,000 years, you cannot imagine any technology which will overcome 10,000 million times. See, or 100 years even is impossible. So we might grow for a while, but we can't just keep on growing. You see, now, so thought is constantly producing consequences and saying I didn't do it, and says I've got to overcome the consequences. So that's incoherent, right? It means you produce results you don't intend. You also start deceiving yourself. In order to avoid facing the issue. Okay, so that's the second point. Now, the third point is that we have produced so many things, thought has produced so many things of all kinds that would be very hard to change. We say all these industrial arrangements, all this trade, right? Our cities, our electricity, it's all there. You see, we can't change it, right? So we've got to go on with it. You see, that's typical of thought. You see that it's constantly producing consequences and saying it didn't do it, and then it says I can't change it. Right? It's too difficult. Now, what are we going to do with that, you see? Now, what we've got to do is to start understanding thought better. You see, we're saying we have been run by the process of thought, right? We don't realize that thought requires attention. Our whole tradition. It's been going on for thousands of years. It didn't start yesterday, right? The Romans were destroying forests several thousand years ago, and North Africa was the most fertile part of the world, and it was turned into a desert, you see, by just cutting down all those trees. Now, we can do it much faster, you see, with chainsaws. we can produce deserts at a greater rate, but you see, technology is not the answer, because technology will do whatever thought tells us we want to do, right, or we've got to do. See, if thought says we've got to cut down trees, we've got to have more money, we've got to have more products, we will use the technology, we'll invent technology that does that. Right? So science and technology cannot be the answer. You see, something more fundamental is needed, right? There's no technological fix to this. You see, there's got to be a change in thought, you see. Now, that is not so easy.
You don't mean a change in thinking positively that I'm self-deceptive or we should change the cities, but the process of thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've somehow got to change this process that's getting us in deeper all the time, you see. See, all the means by which we try to solve these problems are making them worse, right? You know, suppose you say, well, the problem is poverty. You see, for a long time it was poverty. I said, well, we'll try to have industry to make people less poor, but it really hasn't got very far because very large parts of the world are even poorer than they were, but some parts are more wealthy. But now, even at that, if we keep on growing and making these people richer, we're going to have the ecological crisis. You can't keep on making people richer indefinitely. Right? The world won't support it. You see, the people hoped and believed that technology would grow so fast that you'd find a way, but you know, there's no evidence. And if you think that just growing and growing and growing, eventually the growth must prevail. You know, must win over anything you can invent, right? You know, there'll be just so many people in the world anyway that there's no room for them. Now, how are you going to change all that? The customs by which population is determined, by which you know, goals are determined. People say my goal in life is to make money, to get a home, to do this, to be comfortable. You know, it's perfectly reasonable apparently, and yet it all adds up to trouble, right? For each individual it looks very reasonable. So people generally don't want to think about that, and they would rather not believe it, right? So part of thought is self-deception, which says it's not so. They give another explanation, right? So that's part of the process. To relieve the tension and pressure and discomfort of thinking that way, thought invents another explanation which is more reassuring. Now, the question is, what is behind all this kind of thought? Right?
Must derive its power from someplace else.
Well, does it? I mean, we don't know. I mean, where would it derive it from?
It must just come out of something other than itself, and that must be if it could derive its power from the meaning.
How about instinctual needs? Because after all, as humans developed, that was the first source. Thought didn't spring sui generis, it sprang from instinctual needs.
Yes, but if the needs were for security and comfort or whatever, or for improving, you know, one need was to take care of, find sources of food or something. But thought is now, it's surely not our need to destroy ourselves. If people were looking at needs, they would say, let's quick change our thought, right? They deceive themselves about what they need rather than face the issue, right? So thought has, there's something wrong, something incoherent in the process of thought that if it does that. See, thought to be useful should not engage in self-deception. It should not be incoherent, or should not, at least it may be incoherent, but it should not defend incoherence, right?
To say that's the only way human beings have survived.
How?
By defending incoherence, by defending against realization of rationality.
Maybe, but I think that they're not going to survive very much longer that way. At least, therefore, either we say the human race is very badly designed and will disappear, or we say there's a mistake in thought that can be changed. Right now, some people say the human race is a bad job. Let's give it up. You see that's like people like Earth First say. Well, the main thing is to see that some of nature is preserved so that something new can take our place. Right? It's a very depressing point of view. But anyway, it's not even certain that it'll work, you see, because if we go down, we'll probably create such chaos as to bring everything down, you see. So the best way to preserve nature is to solve our problems.
Self-deception, you're talking about something that's in the essential nature of thought or something that's learned?
That's my question. You see, first let's look at the question, right? See, in a dialogue, we sort of have to weigh the question a little, right? You know, ponder it a little and see it, feel it out, right? Now, one view is that something is wrong with the human race. That's pretty hopeless, right? Well,
Doesn't leave much room.
you know, you might hope that technology will develop so as to fix it for a while.
What about the division, though, that's occurred in humans, where some humans see this problem and have addressed it for centuries even, the problems that are dividing us and causing these factions, and then others come out and say, no, you can't talk. Squash.
Yeah, well, they're frightened, you see, but thought creates fear, right? See, it's due to thought saying, if you say those things, you're going to disturb all our comfortable arrangements, and we don't want that, right? And then they say, that in order to do that, people must deceive themselves because they must say, we are not going to look at this. We are going to assume that everything is going to be all right. You see, so they defend themselves against evidence that something is wrong with the thought, right? Now, that's surely something wrong. It's not a good way to survive. You know, when it comes to technical thought, people don't do it so much, right? If they did, the technology wouldn't work at all. They do it to some extent. For example, people who run nuclear plants have been accused of covering up weaknesses in what they're doing, right? Or not really covering it up, but in believing they're cover-up, right?
Part of thought, though, is to make the choice. And how do you choose rather than deceiving?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, how will you make a choice, you see, if you're not clear? You see, it's necessary for thought to be coherent. Now, can you choose to be coherent when you are incoherent? See, because we don't know why we're incoherent, right? I mean, nobody wants to be incoherent. Or at least I don't know of anybody.
Are you saying over time we've created a structure in thought that now is really, it makes it very possible to be self-deceptive and incoherent and to have it seem to be quite reasonable? We've created a kind of structuring of thought?
Yeah. Well, something like that has happened. You see, the thought about religion is not coherent. You see, people will not listen. No two religions have ever managed to really have a dialogue, right? In which they would really listen to each other's assumptions.
Even the religion has come out of the previous incoherence of understanding.
Yeah, but even religions that are very close, different branches of the same one, you see. Now, between nations, it's very hard to get coherent thought, right? Or between ideologies, or whenever anybody's interest or self-interest is involved, right?
Somehow we've identified ourselves more deeply with the problems of thought than we have with, we've identified ourselves more deeply with thought and the things we get out of it than with the obvious problems that thought's causing. We don't identify ourselves as deeply with the destruction of the earth as we do with the destruction of our thought process.
Well, we identify ourselves with our self-interest, right?
Keep our thought processes intact.
Yeah, well, you see, our self-interest is identified with keeping our customary habits unchanged and our arrangements, the things that make us feel secure and that we satisfy us and so on, right?
And that we maintain this incoherence.
Yeah. Now, if it turns out that to do this involves contradiction and incoherence, then we cover it up, right? We deny that it's incoherent and we give a false explanation making it look coherent.
Why is it so important to be coherent?
All right, why? You see, if you're incoherent, one thing is you do not produce the intended results, right? That's one sign of incoherence. Another one is that you're contradicting yourself, you see. Or a third is you're deceiving yourself. Now, that sort of thought, which we say, what is the point of that thought? We'd be better off without it. If you say, see, nobody intends to destroy the planet. Nobody intended that. They merely intended to get rich, right? Well, comfortable, rich, whatever it was, right? Now, I'm not blaming anybody. You see, I'm saying all of us were in it, right? So we did not see that this was dangerous, right? It was incoherent. If our intention had been to destroy the planet, we would have been coherent.
Isn't part of the problem that we're so accustomed to being led that we don't know how to start on our own afresh with leading ourselves in the right direction?
Yeah, but no, who's leading whom, you see?
If suddenly one sees that thought is the culprit, and yet I'm living in a nation very comfortably, and I want to change my affiliation with the ignorance of collective thinking, and suddenly I'm alone, stranded perhaps, suddenly there's a fear that could come about that isn't even necessarily the fear I see in understanding thought.
Yeah, it may be still involved in understanding. See, fear and thought are closely connected. We really have to go into that later, right? And see, one of our assumptions is that thought is one thing and fear is another, pleasure is another, anger is another, and so on, right? Yeah, all the emotions, and also the general stress in the body is another. The tensions and stresses, and what's going on in society is something else again, right? See, that's fragmentation. Now, thought traditionally over thousands of years has conditioned us to believe in that, right? Now, therefore, if you see fear, you say, well, that's not thought, right? But I suggest it may still be thought.
It seems that we have to have some faith that there's enough time for us left to do this change in our thinking, and it seems that maybe we're just, when you mentioned Earth First, it seems like their idea is that, or I would translate it to be like that thought is making us think that we're so important above all the other species that that we'll be trying to solve these problems, that there won't be enough time and everything will be gone, us and everything else.
Yeah, well, we don't know about that. You see, some people estimate it's a short time and some longer, but you see, we don't know, right?
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, I wonder if thought is making us just think that we're just the most important species.
Yes, it's doing that too, yes. Well, but in some sense we are, because we're able to destroy the whole thing. At least we're the key to it, right? Not in one sense we may not be, but in another sense we're the ones on which it all hinges, right? If we don't do it right, the whole thing may come down. Now,
It's kind of like a short-term view, isn't it?
What?
Well, the whole thing may come down.
Well, no, it may revive again later, clearly.
The Earth's been around for 4 billion
Yeah.
years.
It will come back probably, and very probably, right? In some other way.
The question that's coming up for me is, how can we think ourselves out of, how can we use thought to get ourselves out of thought?
But we may have to still. You see, we're not trying to say that thought is entirely vicious or wrong, or thought is a mixture. It's in between. It's doing all these wrong things, and it's also capable of all sorts of other things. We may need something more than thought as well, but we may have to also have clear thought, right? About thought. That's one of the things we're coming to. You see, we're thinking about all sorts of things, but we have never said that it's very important to think clearly about thought. This may be the first step.
Isn't thought the product of memory? And isn't memory the result of millions of years of conditioning, like a program in a computer? So I always thought on that basis able to do anything but mix the furniture around, just change the elements of the memory.
Yes, you can raise that question. It's an interesting one, you see, but you see, we're in danger of painting ourselves into a corner by saying thought is all bad, right? You see, if you say thought is all bad, then we need something beside thought, right? But then how are you going to get it? You see, thought will never give it to you, and you will hope for a miracle, right?
Is there anything else but this conditioning? Isn't it?
But suppose I say there is, that's still thought. You see, I can say anything, right? I can say there's a great, glorious thing which we can all, which will solve all our problems, right? But it's still thought. So we have got to do something else, you see.
Isn't, the only real problem in thought, the notion within thought that there's somebody who's thinking?
Well, that is so, but that's quite hard to get at because it seems so obvious that there is. You see, I hope we can get to that. You see, but we raised the question that thought is memory, right? Now, you see, that's an interesting point, you see, which may be a clue. That I want to distinguish between thinking and thought. Now, thinking is an active process, I say, which is actually going on. The word ing at the end, the syllable ing suggests something active. And thought is the past. So when you say, when we have been thinking, we then suppose it all vanishes. And, as thinking tells you what's right, what the way things really are, and then you decide what to do, and you do it, and then it's all gone. But in fact, I say thinking becomes thought, right? It goes on to a program. What you have been thinking, especially the conclusions and the assumptions, the general things like that, go onto a program. You see, if you've been thinking that people of that category are bad, it becomes a program, and you see them as bad, you'll respond immediately, right? If you tell your children that, that's the way they're going to behave automatically, right? It's the memory springs into action like a program. You don't have time to see it happening, and you think that's just the reality and the truth. Now, we need that because if you're going to drive a car, you have to do a lot of thought enters in. You learn all sorts of things that you ought to be doing. It becomes part of your program, right? So that you can respond immediately rather than have to think. You see, if you took time to think the response, it would be too late. So you need this possibility of making thought a program, in all sorts of ways, right? Yet it's dangerous, because this program, when you don't notice it, can spring into action and tell you these people are bad. I must kill such and such a person. Under such conditions, I must kill. Under such conditions, I must do this. I must do that. I'm this sort of person. They're that sort of person. We'll never meet, and so on. You see, thought can tell you all that like a program, so that you see it that way. Is that clear? It affects your perception. It affects your whole attitude. It affects your adrenaline. You see, if for example, you're in a dark place and people have said there's assailants in this neighborhood, and you see a shadow, your thought immediately makes you jump, right? The fact that you know there is, if you didn't think there were any assailants, you would say nothing, right? So, or if you look again and see it's a shadow, it's all gone, you see. So thought, which is programmed from what people have said and what you've thought, what you've been thinking, acts immediately. It acts immediately in millions of ways. And this has been going on collectively as well as individually for ages, you see, and it's building up, as you have remarked.
It makes robots out of all of us.
It makes us at least have a lot of robotic characteristics, right? And we may not be
It's almost total, isn't it?
well, if we say it, we have to be careful. If we don't know that it's true, we'd be careful not to say it, because that thought itself will make a robot out of us, do you see? That thought, a robot, you see, that thought will say, we are nothing but robots, and then we will be robots. Right? You see, you have to watch out that the very thought we are using in this minute is very crucial. It may be the thought that's doing the whole thing, right?
All words are a limitation in a sense. So.
Well, but once again, if you say all words, we just better keep silent. You see, and then when we keep silent, we don't solve the problem either. You see, that's a way of using language which makes trouble. You see, the word all must be used very carefully because it is one of the most powerful programming words there is. Like all, you know, I don't know, you see, they're all of those people are that way, you know. It's forever, you'll be that way forever, you see, and so on. That has a tremendously powerful programming effect, right? So that means we must watch this language and say, generally speaking, there are times when we should use the word all, but we have to be careful, right? It can be a very powerful programming word. You see, so we have this thought, and we're saying the thought acts like a program. You have thinking and thought, right? Thinking is a bit more active because when you're thinking, you can detect incoherence sometimes, right? You can detect there's something wrong with what I'm thinking. But thought works so fast you can't do that. You see, so how do you detect that? You get a feeling, a sense something is wrong. You see, you require sensitivity to that, right? Now that sensitivity is crucial, and we won't have time for this evening, but I think society systematically destroys it in order to avoid being upset, right? I would rather have people not noticing incoherence because then you don't upset the apple cart too much. You see, so therefore we have learned to sort of cover that up. Now, but let's say we have this sensitivity which is very subtle, which can show us incoherence in our thought.